You will go to him. Those 4 words. 4 words delivered not in anger, not in desperation, but in the flat and hollow tone of a man who had already counted the cost and decided it was acceptable, and that cost was his own daughter. Anna Holt did not move from the window. The gray light of an English November pressed against the glass, and her reflection stared back at her. 21 years old, dark auburn hair pinned too tightly, green eyes that had learned long ago not to show too much. Outside, the grounds of Holt Hall, what remained of them, lay stripped and skeletal, the ornamental hedges untrimmed for 2 seasons, the fountain dry. Her father's study smelled of old tobacco and older failures. You sold my hand to clear a gambling debt. Baron Holt pressed his lips together. He was a tall man gone soft at the edges, the kind of man who had once commanded a room and now merely occupied one. I negotiated a settlement that saves this family. There is a distinction. There is no distinction from where I'm standing, father. He moved to his desk. A glass of brandy sat waiting. He did not offer her one. He never had. She was a daughter, not a guest in her own home. Lord Stoke holds every note I owe. Every one. If those debts are called in, we lose the hall, the London house, your mother's jewels. Your sisters lose their prospects. Everything. And I lose nothing, I suppose, in all of this. Her father had the grace to look away. Lord Ashford is a duke. You will want for nothing material. I have never once asked you for material things. He had no answer for that. He knew it was true. Anna was the 3rd daughter, the quiet one, the one who read in corners and spoke only when spoken to, and had learned, from the age of 8, that her existence in this family was largely administrative. She managed the household accounts. She corresponded with the solicitors. She kept the library catalogued and the menus ordered and the servants paid on what little remained in the estate's account. She had never once been thanked for any of it. And now she understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water on bare skin, that she had been useful to her father right up to the moment when being useful required her to disappear entirely. The contract will be signed on Thursday. Stoke's solicitor will be present. You will attend. And if I refuse, then you watch everything this family has left crumble to dust by Christmas. That is not a threat, Anna. That is arithmetic. She turned from the window. She looked at her father, really looked at him, and for one searing moment she searched his face for something. Regret. Apology. The smallest acknowledgement that he knew what he was asking. She found nothing, and that, in the end, was what made her pick up her skirts and walk out of his study without another word. Not to sign, not to refuse, simply to go somewhere she could breathe. Before we go any further, comment sold if you would have walked out that door, or sign if you would have picked up the pen for someone you love. I need to know which one you are. The solicitor's office on Greycoat Lane smelled of sealing wax and old ambition, which was perhaps an appropriate perfume for the business conducted there on that particular Thursday. Anna arrived by hired carriage. Her father's own horses had been quietly sold the previous spring. She wore her best day dress, dove-gray wool with ivory trim at the collar, for years out of fashion, and she knew it. She had chosen it deliberately. If she was to be inspected today, she would not pretend to be something she wasn't. Lord Percival Stoke was already inside when she arrived. He was 60, perhaps, but wore it with the studied elegance of a man who considered age merely another thing to be managed. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, dressed in the kind of tailored perfection that spoke of money so old it no longer needed to announce itself. He rose from his chair when she entered, and the smile that spread across his face was the warmest, most practiced thing Anna had ever seen. Miss Holt, what an absolute pleasure. I have heard a great deal about your composure. I see the reports did not exaggerate. He took her hand and bowed over it, and his lips did not quite touch her skin, just near enough to register as courtesy, far enough to be something else entirely. Something that reminded her of a man studying a painting he was considering purchasing. Lord Stoke. She withdrew her hand with the minimum possible speed. There was nothing she could name. No specific word said too long. No touch that crossed a line. He was impeccable. And yet something in the room shifted when he spoke, the way a room's temperature can drop before anyone has opened a window. I confess I had hoped Lord Ashford himself might join us today, but he is a man of considerable demands upon his time. His proxy, Mr. Fenwick, is fully empowered to act on his behalf. You understand. A man of his station does not attend every preliminary. Every preliminary. That was what she was then. A preliminary. She understood in that moment that Lord Ashford had not come because she had not been worth coming for. She sat down. She read the contract, every word of it, while both men waited. Stoke with patient amusement, the solicitor with barely concealed impatience. The terms were as her father had stated. She would become Duchess of Ashford. The Holt debts, all of them, £42,000, a figure that made her stomach clench, would be cleared. The Holt estate would remain in the family's hands. In exchange, Anna Holt would provide the Duke with a wife of respectable lineage for purposes of social standing, and she would conduct herself with discretion and comply with all reasonable requirements of a duchess. Reasonable requirements. As if the law were embarrassed to be more specific. She signed her name. Her hand did not shake, because she had made a decision in the carriage on the way here. She would not let them see it. Any of it. Not the fear, not the anger, not the grief that sat beneath both of those like a cold stone in deep water. Her name on the page was clean and clear. Anna Holt. For the last time. The wedding took place 11 days later in the chapel at Ashford's London residence. A small stone building that predated the main house by 2 centuries and smelled accordingly. There were no flowers. Anna had not expected flowers. Her sister Lynn was there, sitting very straight in the second pew, her expression unreadable. They had not spoken much since the arrangement was announced. Lynn was the eldest daughter, handsome and sharp-tongued and quite thoroughly convinced that her own prospects had been mortgaged along with everything else. She had looked at Anna that morning with something complex in her eyes. Not quite pity, not quite contempt. Something that resided between the two and was entirely Lynn. The groom arrived 7 minutes after the appointed hour. Callum Ashford, Duke of Ashford, came through the chapel doors without apology and without haste, as though the concept of lateness was an inconvenience invented by lesser people. He was taller than she had imagined, lean, with the kind of physical economy that suggested a man who had never wasted emotion in his life. Dark hair, cut short, a jaw that looked like it had been constructed for the express purpose of looking uncompromising. His wedding coat was midnight blue, immaculate. He did not look at her during the approach. He did not look at her during the vows. His eyes stayed fixed somewhere above the chaplain's left shoulder, as though he were reading scripture from the stone wall beyond. His voice, when he spoke his responses, was low and perfectly controlled, the voice of a man reciting a legal document rather than making a promise. Anna answered her own vows looking directly at his profile. She watched for something. A flinch. A muscle moving in his jaw. Any indication that the words being spoken had any weight in them at all for the man beside her. She found very little. But there was one moment, only one, when he finally turned his head and their eyes met. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. His were gray, darker than she had expected. There was something in them she couldn't name, not cruelty, not coldness exactly, but a distance so absolute it looked almost like an achievement, as though he had worked very hard to be this far away from everything. Then the chaplain pronounced them married, and Lord Callum Ashford looked away again. That night they were alone for the first time. The ducal chamber at Ashford House was enormous and dark-paneled and very quiet. A fire had been laid. 2 chairs angled toward it. There was no ceremony in how he entered. He simply was there, having knocked once before opening the door, which was more consideration than she had expected. He crossed to the fireplace. He did not sit. Anna remained standing near the window. She kept her hands still at her sides, because she was not going to let them fold in front of her like a penitence. The silence stretched. When he finally spoke, he was looking at the fire. "I want to say something to you before we go any further in this arrangement." "Say it then." He turned. His eyes met hers in the firelight, and there was something deliberate in the way he held the look, as though he were choosing each next word with the care of a man choosing between locked doors. "Don't fall for me." Anna had prepared for many things he might say. That was not among them. She kept her face still. But something in the words, the very particular way he had said them, not as a dismissal but as a warning, not with arrogance but with something that sounded almost like dread, settled against her ribs in an unexpected way. "This is a contract. I will honor it with every material resource at my disposal. You will have your own rooms, your own household account, freedom of movement within reason. What you will not have is me. I am not available for what women in your position sometimes convince themselves is possible. I have no interest in being known, no interest in being understood. What you see here is what there is." He stopped. His jaw tightened once, almost imperceptibly, before he continued, quieter. "I am saying this to protect us both. Not only you." Anna studied him. A man in a beautiful coat in a beautiful room, standing like a sentinel at his own fire, warning her away from something she hadn't approached, something he apparently needed her to stay very far from. She thought of her father, who had sold her without flinching. She thought of Lord Stoke, whose smile had felt like a thumb pressed gently on a bruise. She thought of the fact that she had signed a contract today, in a gray dress, alone. "Your Grace, I have no designs on your heart. I don't believe I was given the impression there was one to be had. Now, shall we agree on which days we are required to appear in the same room, or shall we work that out in the morning?" Something passed through his expression. It was quick and unidentified and gone before she could name it. "The morning." He left. She exhaled. She stood in the firelight of the largest room she had ever occupied and felt, for the first time in 11 days, almost amused. Not happily, but almost. Ashford Manor arrived at the end of a long straight drive, the kind of drive designed by architects who understood that one ought to be humbled before reaching the door. The house itself was built of pale stone that turned almost silver in certain winter light, with east and west wings extending like arms held just wide enough apart to communicate mastery without welcome. Anna learned it by walking. Every morning of the first week, she rose before the household was fully awake and took a different corridor, a different staircase. She mapped the silences. The east wing, entirely closed, with a pair of doors at its far end that bore no handle on the outer side. The library, which was extraordinary and clearly loved. The books had been read, their spines creased, and yet nobody appeared to use it during daylight hours. The breakfast room, where she ate alone each morning while the Duke presumably breakfasted somewhere she was not. The house was staffed with precision and spoken to with the minimum necessary language, and it ran like a mechanism. She had never lived inside a mechanism before. Mrs. Doyle was the housekeeper. She was 50-something, with a face that had once been animated and was now largely composed into efficiency. But the eyes still gave things away if you watched long enough. She brought Anna a cup of tea on the third morning, unprompted, and set it on the writing table without comment. Anna looked up. "The household is yours to manage as you see fit. Your Grace. I will follow your direction in all domestic matters. But, Mrs. Doyle's expression shifted the smallest degree. No, but, Your Grace, I simply wanted you to have tea. 2 mornings later, Anna asked her about the East Wing. She had found the corridor lit by a single lamp, which suggested it wasn't entirely abandoned. Mrs. Doyle set down the tray she was carrying very carefully. Do not ask him about the portrait in the East Corridor, my lady. Not yet. Just that. Not yet, as though there might be a correct moment, and this was not it. Anna filed it. She had learned long ago that information, like money, was best saved until the moment it mattered most. Their first real conversation happened on a Tuesday in the library, because Anna had been there reading since mid-afternoon and simply had not left, and the Duke apparently wanted a particular volume from the third shelf that sat directly behind her chair. He stood in the doorway for a moment, clearly not having expected her. Herodotus, I beg your pardon? You're sitting in front of the section I need. She stood and moved aside. He crossed to the shelf, found the book in approximately 4 seconds, and was about to leave when she spoke. Why Herodotus? He stopped. He did not turn immediately. He wrote about empires that believed themselves permanent. I find it instructive. Instructive or comforting? He turned then. His gray eyes held something that was not quite surprise. What is the distinction to you? Instruction assumes the reader believes they can learn from the past and apply it. Comfort assumes the reader already knows the outcome is inevitable and is simply looking for company in the knowledge. Silence. He held the book at his side and looked at her the way people look at a sentence that has arrived in a language they didn't expect to understand. Which do you read for? Instruction. I haven't given up yet. Something moved across his face. Not warmth, but a lessening of the cold, the way morning shifts before the sun actually appears. He looked down at the book in his hand. When he looked back at her, his expression was arranged again, composed. Good evening, Your Grace. He left. Anna stood in the library for a long time after, listening to the fire. Lord Stoke arrived on a Wednesday morning, 11 days after Anna's arrival at the manor. He had not been invited. He arrived in an open carriage with 2 outriders, wearing a deep burgundy coat that was entirely too festive for a social call, and he descended with the particular confidence of a man who had never once experienced a door closed against him. Anna was in the drawing room. She heard his voice in the entrance hall and felt, before she had time to analyze it, that specific chill. The Duke received him in the morning room. Anna was not summoned. She appeared anyway, because this was her house and she intended to behave as though she knew it. The 2 men stood near the windows, and the air between them was the kind that develops between countries that have been at war and decided, for this particular moment, to call it a truce. Callum's face was granite. Stokes was cordial to an almost comical degree. Ashford, I must offer my belated congratulations. Your new Duchess is a credit to her family. To both your households. We did not expect you. I was passing through the county. It would have been rude to do otherwise. He turned and found Anna with his eyes immediately, as though he had known exactly where she was standing. Your Grace, may I say, and I mean this with the sincerity it deserves, Ashford Manor suits you. Some women belong in certain rooms. You belong in this one. It was, on the surface, a compliment. In fact, it was something else. A reminder that he had placed her there. That the room, the house, the title, all of it had been arranged by his hand. She smiled with exactly the warmth required. How kind. I hope your journey north proves fruitful, Lord Stoke. She left. He let her. But as she passed him, he spoke again, quietly, in a voice pitched only for her. Do be sure to make yourself indispensable, won't you? For your family's sake. It would be such a shame if circumstances were to change. Anna walked out of the morning room and did not stop walking until she reached the far end of the garden, where the stone wall was cold under her palms and the bare trees gave her the closest thing to privacy the grounds afforded. She did not tell Callum. Not yet. It was the lock that gave. She hadn't forced anything. She had been looking for the linen closet genuinely, because she had wanted additional blankets and had not wanted to trouble Mrs. Doyle, and the east wing door at the far end of the portrait corridor had simply swung inward when she touched it, as though something in the mechanism had grown tired of keeping things closed. The corridor beyond was dim and cold. Wall-mounted candelabras held no candles. The carpet runner was thick with a silence that had settled over years. And at the far end, above a small console table, there was a portrait. A young woman, perhaps 22 or 23, painted in the manner of 6 or 7 years prior. She was seated with the kind of composed expression that painters usually imposed on their subjects, but which, in this case, had a quality of truth, as though this woman had actually been still, actually been at peace, in the moment of her sitting. She had pale gold hair, blue eyes, a soft mouth, set in something that was almost a smile. She was wearing a ring Anna had seen before. It was on a velvet stand in the East Wing's small writing room, which she could just see from where she stood. A sapphire engagement ring, laid down and apparently never removed. Anna stood in front of the portrait for a long time. She had come into a house full of silences, and she had been cataloging them. But this was the one that explained all the others. Callum Ashford had loved someone, and she was gone. And he had built this entire manor, this entire life, this entire impenetrable self, around the space where she used to be. Comment East Wing if you felt that chill. Keep watching because what Anna finds next will change everything. Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. It is essential that we get your support through subscriptions, likes, and comments. So if this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button for us, smash the like, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's get back to the story. She told him the next morning. Not with drama. Not with the deliberate theater of a woman wishing to wound. She found him at the breakfast table, the first time they had been in the same room for that meal, and she sat across from him and said, quite plainly, I went into the East Wing by accident yesterday. The lock was not engaged. I saw the portrait. His cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down with complete control, but she had seen the half-second before the control arrived, and what was in that half-second was nothing she could name except that it was real. It won't happen again. I didn't say it should. I said I was telling you, because I thought you should know rather than wonder. I don't discuss it. I'm not asking you to. Pause. Then what are you asking? She considered this. She hadn't actually been asking anything. She had been making a statement of honesty in a house where honesty appeared to be an item kept in a locked wing. Nothing. I thought you deserved the courtesy of knowing. He looked at her. It was a different look than any he had given her before. Not the assessing look of the first day, not the closed look of the wedding night, not the almost surprised look from the library. This was something else, and it lasted long enough that she noticed she was noticing it before he pulled his gaze back to his plate. Have the lock repaired. He said it to the table. She took it as the closest thing to a thank you available in his current vocabulary and did not press further. Lord Fenwick's autumn ball at Pemberton Hall was the kind of social event that functioned less as entertainment and more as a competitive display of marital adequacy, and Callum Ashford had apparently committed to attending sometime in the summer before he had known there would be a wife to bring. They arrived together, which was required. They greeted their hosts together, which was also required. And then the evening opened before them like a test neither of them had been given time to study for. He was different in public. Not warmer exactly, but operational in a way that was almost impressive. He spoke when spoken to with the precise minimum, and managed to communicate both authority and courtesy without deploying more than 2 sentences at a time. Rooms rearranged themselves around him without his doing anything. Anna stayed close enough to be credible and far enough not to crowd him, and she thought she was managing rather well until Mrs. Fenwick steered her decisively into a conversation about flower arrangements that lasted 14 minutes and left her on the wrong side of the ballroom. The dancing started. She felt him before she saw him, the particular quality of attention that preceded his presence. He arrived at her elbow formally without preamble. They'll expect it. He meant the dance. She understood. Of course. She put her hand in his. Later, she would not be able to account for what happened in the next 3 minutes entirely. The ballroom sounds continued. The other couples moved around them in the patterns of the set. His hand was at her waist. Not tentative, not possessive, simply placed, with the same economy of motion he brought to everything. But something in the proximity changed the temperature of the air between them. He was looking somewhere past her shoulder, maintaining form. She was looking at the 3rd button of his lapel, maintaining composure. Neither of them spoke. And then he turned her through a figure in the dance, and their eyes met by accident, and the 3 inches of space between them seemed to contract in a way that had nothing to do with choreography. His hand at her waist tightened, not by much, perhaps the width of a breath. But she felt it. She said nothing. He said nothing. The dance ended. He released her hand with complete propriety and said, very quietly, "Thank you." She had the distinct impression he was not thanking her for the dance. She found Lynn in the powder room. Her sister was alone, adjusting a glove that did not require adjusting, the universal activity of a woman who needs 30 seconds to decide what she is actually going to say. Lynn looked at her in the mirror. "He's watchful with you. He's watchful with everyone. Not in the same way." Anna opened her mouth to dismiss this and then, because Lynn's eyes held something that was not cruelty, closed it again. "Father didn't just sell you, Anna. He sold you to the one man in England that Stoke has been trying to destroy for 3 years. Did you never wonder why you specifically?" The powder room was suddenly very still. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Of all the indebted barons' daughters in England, why you? Why this particular debt? Why Stoke as the intermediary? Stoke arranged this marriage, but ask yourself, Anna, who chose you?" Lynn smoothed her gloves and left. Anna remained in front of the mirror, and the face that looked back at her was the face of a woman who had just understood that she was not standing on solid ground. Stoke found her at the refreshment table before the evening ended. He materialized at her elbow with the practiced smoothness of a man who had spent decades becoming the kind of person who appears where you least want him. "Your Grace, may I?" He was already leading her to the floor. It was not a request. The social mechanics of the moment made refusal technically possible but practically awkward enough that she stepped forward rather than make a scene. He danced beautifully. Of course he did. "I must say the Duke looks well. Better than he has in some time. I will pass along your observation. You do that. Tell me. Has he shown you the East Wing?" She kept her face entirely still. "I don't believe the East Wing is a topic for a ball. No, I don't suppose it is. Suffice to say, there are rooms in that house that hold a great deal of history. History that some parties would prefer remain contained. I trust you are a woman who understands the value of quiet." The music ended. He bowed over her hand. "A pleasure, as always, Your Grace." She turned. Across the room, Callum was watching. His face held nothing, nothing a stranger would read as anything. But Anna had been studying him for 3 weeks, and what she saw was not indifference. It was something that had been indifference once, and was currently, very quietly, becoming something else. She did not discover what Callum had done until 3 days later. Mrs. Doyle mentioned, in passing and without ceremony, that a contribution had been made in her name to the Benevolent Society for the Daughters of Impoverished Gentry, a charitable organization she had mentioned, once, in passing, to Mrs. Doyle, in a conversation she had assumed was simply conversation. She had said, offhandedly, meaning very little by it, that she had sometimes wondered if there was an organization for girls in the position she had been in. Girls who were clever and capable and simply needed time and resources rather than to be married off to solve someone else's problem. She had said it once, to a housekeeper, while discussing the menus for the week. The contribution was substantial. It had come from the Ashford household accounts. It bore no note, no name, no instruction of any kind. He had not intended her to know. She was fairly certain he had no idea that Mrs. Doyle would mention it. Anna stood in the corridor outside the library for a long moment, holding this piece of information like a bird that had landed unexpectedly in her hand. Comment he felt it, if you caught that moment. Because Callum Ashford just did something he swore he never would. Stay with me, she began carefully. There was a method to it. She was her father's account manager for 6 years, and she knew how to find a thread and follow it without pulling so hard the entire fabric gave. She started with Mrs. Doyle. Not with direct questions, those would close doors. Instead, she asked about the household patterns, the history of the manor's staffing, how long Mrs. Doyle had been in the position. Ordinary questions, safe questions, and slowly, across 4 conversations spread over as many days, Mrs. Doyle filled in the edges of a picture Anna had been building. She was called Miss Eleanor of the Carew family. She and His Grace were to be married in the spring of 1814. She was young, 20 perhaps, lovely, quiet in the way some women are quiet because the world has taught them to be. Mrs. Doyle paused. There was a scandal. Documents surfaced, letters, supposedly, that her father had written. Business correspondence of a deeply compromising nature. The Carew family was ruined within a month. Their assets were seized. Eleanor. She did not survive the winter. Anna understood what that meant. She sat with it for a moment, very still. And the documents? His Grace believed, from the very beginning, that they were forged. But believing and proving are different countries, Your Grace. He has spent 6 years in the space between them. She found the letter in the library. She was not looking for it. She was looking for a specific volume on estate law, the section regarding land rights and the conditions under which they transferred through marriage, because Lynn's question had lodged itself in her mind like a splinter, and the library was where she always went when something needed to be understood rather than simply borne. The letter was folded inside the back cover of a ledger that should have contained only maintenance accounts. It was not sealed. It was not addressed. It was written in a hand that was not Callum's. It was from Stoke, to his own solicitor. And it was dated 8 months ago, which placed it squarely in the period before Anna's name had entered any conversation about the Ashford dukedom. The letter did not confess to forgery. Men like Stoke did not write confessions. But it spoke, in the particular language of men who believed themselves entirely safe, about the planned acquisition of the Ashford Eastern Land Corridor, land that, the letter noted, would transfer through legitimate marriage under the terms of the original Ashford entailment. It spoke of the importance of ensuring the right marriage. It spoke of the Holt family's useful position as a mechanism. And it spoke, in one paragraph near the end, in phrasing oblique enough to have plausible deniability, about the matter of the Carew documents, and the importance of those documents never being surfaced. Anna sat for a long time at the library table. This was not the picture she had been building. This was a completely different picture, and it made the first one look like a rough preliminary sketch. Stoke had not arranged this marriage as a mechanism of debt collection. He had arranged it as a mechanism of land acquisition, believing, apparently, that the right wife in the right position would give him eventual access to the Ashford Eastern Corridor through pressure or manipulation. But Callum had not simply been a victim of the arrangement. Callum had known. Callum had chosen the Holt family. He had chosen Anna, specifically deliberately, because the Holt debt gave him something else entirely. A legal thread connecting Stoke directly to the forged documents. The debt, the arrangement, Stoke's explicit involvement as intermediary, all of it was being constructed piece by careful piece into a case that would expose everything. Anna had not been a rescue. She had been a strategy. She was in the morning room, very still, when Stoke arrived. She heard the carriage. She heard Mrs. Doyle's voice in the entrance hall, strained in a register that no one else would have noticed. She did not move. He came to her. He always knew where to find people. Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. I find myself with a matter of some delicacy to discuss. He sat without being invited. He crossed one leg over the other, and his expression was the expression he wore when he was most dangerous, which was the expression he wore when he was most pleasant. I understand you've been spending considerable time in the library. A woman of letters, admirable. One must hope, of course, that such extensive reading remains focused on appropriate material. Anna kept her hands folded in her lap. She looked at him with the same neutrality she had used on her father, on solicitors, on every man who had sat across from her and believed she was simply decorative. I have always found that appropriate material is rather a matter of perspective. His eyes sharpened, just briefly. Then the pleasant expression settled back over them like still water after a stone. Indeed, I would hate to think that certain perspectives might put your family in a complicated position. Your father is a man who depends on the continued goodwill of his creditors. Debts that have been cleared can, under certain circumstances, become recomplicated, particularly if the terms of the original arrangement are called into question. He smiled. I say this as a friend to your family, Your Grace, as someone who has your best interests very much at heart. It would be a great shame if any uncertainty were to arise about the validity of the Holt-Ashford contract. It would leave your family in quite an untenable position. Wouldn't it? He rose. He adjusted his gloves. He smiled again, and it reached his eyes, and that was the worst part. Good day, Your Grace. Give my regards to the Duke. He left. Anna waited until his carriage was through the gate. Then she went to find Callum. She found him in the study. He was at his desk, working, the kind of work that was more than ledgers. She could see that now, the stacks of correspondence arranged with a deliberate logic she hadn't previously understood. He looked up when she came in. Anna. He had started using her name. She had not, until this moment, tracked precisely when. I found a letter in the library, inside the back cover of the 1808 maintenance ledger. It was written by Stoke to his own solicitor, 8 months before our marriage was arranged. He was very still. It discusses the Ashford Eastern Land Corridor, the conditions under which it would transfer. And it discusses my family's debt as a mechanism, his word, for arranging a marriage that would give him proximity to that transfer. He thought he was using you through me. She placed the letter on the desk between them. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. But that isn't all. Mrs. Doyle told me about Miss Eleanor Carew. Something happened to his face. Not much, but it was the realest thing she had ever seen from him, and it lasted nearly 4 full seconds before the control returned. She spoke to you about Eleanor. Yes, and I understand, I believe I understand why you chose my family. Our debt gave you a direct legal chain. Stoke as intermediary, Stoke's arrangement, Stoke's hand in all of it, documented and provable. You needed a wife whose family Stoke had already touched. She stopped. She looked at him across the desk. I was a strategy. Yes. It was not a denial. He did not dress it up. He did not qualify it or apologize for it or attempt to reframe it as anything other than the word she had used. And that, somehow, was worse than anything else he could have said. You married me to build a legal case. My life, my name, my consent, what I gave up was infrastructure. That is what I intended, yes. Intended. Past tense. He stood. He moved to the window, not to look out of it, she understood, but because he needed not to be sitting.
Stoke destroyed Eleanor.
He forged documents that took her family apart in a month. He timed it to cause maximum damage. I watched her. I watched what it did to her, and there was nothing I could touch him with, nothing legal, nothing provable. He is untouchable unless approached from inside his own arrangement. His voice was still controlled, but at the edges it was fraying, in the way that things fray when they have been held tight for a very long time. I chose your family because I needed a specific kind of leverage. And because your father's circumstances were such that Stoke had inserted himself already. You were already in his orbit. I could not change that. I told myself that you would have material security, safety, a title, that the practical exchange was equitable. And what do you tell yourself now? He turned from the window. That I was wrong. Not about the strategy, about the terms I used to justify it. About reducing you to terms at all. You are not infrastructure, Anna. You have not been, from the moment you told me you read for instruction rather than comfort. It was not an apology. He had told her at the outset. No speeches. But it was the first true thing he had said to her. Not managed, not composed, not built for effect. Just the plain shape of what he had done and what he had learned since. Anna stood across the desk and breathed. She was not crying. She had cried exactly once in this whole affair. Alone on the morning of the wedding, quietly, for 10 minutes, and that had been sufficient. She was angry, but beneath the anger something else pressed against it, and she recognized it with the specific irritation of a woman who would have preferred not to. Stoke came this afternoon. He threatened my family's debt. He knows I've been asking questions. He'll know about the letter soon, if he doesn't already. Then whatever you're building, you need to build it faster. He looked at her. She looked back. Don't make promises that are also strategies. It isn't a strategy. The room held that. Comment. Tell him. If you were screaming at her to walk out. Or stay. If you understood why she didn't. This is the moment everything changes. She left on a Thursday. Not dramatically. She did not slam the door of the study when she walked out, or any other door thereafter. She went to her rooms, where she spent half an hour sitting at the window watching the grounds in the early gray light, and then she asked for her trunks to be brought up, and she packed the things that were hers. Not the Ashford jewels, not the wardrobe that had been purchased for the role, just the books she had brought, her correspondence, the dove-gray wool dress. She told Mrs. Doyle she was visiting her sister in the city. She said it pleasantly because it was true, and because she did not owe the household an explanation. Mrs. Doyle looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of a woman who knows everything and will say very little. Shall I tell his grace? He'll know soon enough. She took the carriage to Lynn's house in the city. Lynn received her without questions. That was, Anna reflected, the first time in recent memory that her sister's tendency toward brevity had been a gift rather than a grievance. Lynn simply said, "Your room is made up," and went back to her own affairs, and Anna spent the first day in the chair by the window and the second day in the same chair, and on both days she said almost nothing, and Lynn made no attempt to remedy this, which was the most sisterly thing Lynn had ever done. On the morning of the third day, Lynn appeared in the doorway with tea. "Are you planning to stay?" "I don't know yet. That's honest. He used our family's position as a legal mechanism to build a case against Stoke. I know. Anna looked up. I didn't know specifics. But Anna, I told you at the ball. Did you think my question was rhetorical? Someone told Father that the Ashford arrangement would make his debts go away. Father, bless his useless heart, took it as salvation and didn't ask the source. I've been trying to follow the chain for weeks. And Callum Ashford has been building a case against Stoke since 1814. He is not a man acting from greed. He is a man acting from grief, which is considerably more dangerous and considerably more human. The question isn't whether his original intentions were clean. The question is who he has become since you arrived. Anna held her tea. For what it's worth, and I realize this costs me some pride to say, I think you should go back. Not for him. For yourself. Because that house is yours, and that title is yours, and you earned both, and I don't think you're the kind of woman who walks away from things she's earned. Anna said nothing. Lynn took this as a good sign and left. She heard about Stoke from Lynn's parlor maid, of all things. The parlor maid's cousin worked in a solicitor's office on Chancery Lane, and the gossip that came through that office on the 5th morning of Anna's stay was that Lord Percival Stoke had been called before a tribunal of peers regarding alleged document fraud in connection with the collapse of the Carew family estate in 1814. That the evidence presented included certified correspondence, authenticated ledger records, and sworn testimony from a former employee. That Stoke had appeared before the tribunal composed and immaculate and had said, with complete equanimity, that he looked forward to demonstrating his innocence. That none of his advocates, upon leaving the proceedings, had looked particularly encouraged. Anna did not allow herself to feel triumphant. Stoke was not finished yet. Men like Stoke never finished cleanly. But the walls were closing, and they were closing because Callum had spent 6 years building the room around them. She thought about that for a long time. A man who spends 6 years on something doesn't do it for strategy alone. Strategy runs out when it stops making sense. What sustains 6 years of meticulous, patient, quietly furious effort is love that has become grief that has become purpose. And that Anna understood in the way that some understanding arrives not as an idea but as a physical fact. That was not a man without a heart. That was a man who had lost the person his heart was for, and had not yet found another use for it. He did not come for her. He did not send a carriage or a messenger or a letter full of declarations. He was apparently far too much himself to do any of those things, and she had, in truth, expected none of them. What arrived on the 6th morning was a package, delivered by Mrs. Doyle personally, who had apparently driven to the city on no instruction Anna could identify and stood in Lynn's entrance hall looking exactly like a woman who had done something on her own initiative and was entirely at peace with it. The package was wrapped in brown paper. Anna opened it at the writing table in her room. Inside was a book. Her copy of Herodotus, the one she had been reading the day of the library encounter, which she had left behind without noticing, because she had not thought anyone would notice it either. It was the same battered edition, same cracked spine, same pages she had annotated in pencil in the margins because she couldn't help herself. He had found it. He had presumably picked it up from wherever she had left it. And he had had Mrs. Doyle bring it to her. Nothing else. No note.
No explanation.
Just, you left this and I know it matters to you and you should have it. Anna held the book. She thought about the charitable contribution made in her name with no note. About the kind of man who pays attention like a language, in actions that say the things he has locked all his doors against saying. She thought about what it must have cost him to hold that book, knowing what it meant and what it meant to return it. She thought about Eleanor Carew, who had deserved better, and about the fact that grief given no exit will find one, and about the fact that she herself had spent 21 years being useful instead of wanted, and that she was very, very tired of that particular accommodation. She put the book in her bag. She arrived at the manor at late afternoon, when the silver light was doing the thing it sometimes did to the pale stone, making the whole structure look less like something built for defense and more like something that had simply been here long enough to become part of the ground. Callum was on the front steps. He was not there dramatically. He was not the kind of man who staged his waiting. He had simply, apparently, been outside for some reason of his own, and was there when her carriage came through the gate. She stepped down. He did not move toward her. She walked to the bottom step and looked up at him. "I need to say something before I come inside." "Say it." "I am not furniture. I am not infrastructure. I am not a mechanism or a transaction or a preliminary. If I come inside this house, it will be because I choose it, and that means I need you to choose it too. Not as a strategy, not as a corrected error. Actually choose it." He looked at her. The light was changing, the sky going the deep blue that precedes dark, and his face in it was the face she had been learning for 8 weeks. The architecture of it, the way control lived there as a habit and not, she now understood, as the whole truth of him. "I choose it." 2 words. Under 10, as was his nature. But they landed with all the weight of everything he did not say, and Anna understood, had been understanding him long enough to know, that from this particular man, in this particular voice, 2 words could carry the weight of paragraphs. "Then I'll come in." She walked up the steps. He did not step aside, not immediately, and for one moment they were simply standing at the threshold, close enough that she could see the precise gray of his eyes in the last light of the afternoon. He reached out, not dramatically. His hand found hers at his side, and he held it once, briefly, with a steadiness that felt like a sentence completed. Then he opened the door. 3 weeks later, on a cold Saturday morning, Anna was in the library. She was at the large table with the Ashford household accounts spread before her, not because anyone had asked her to, but because she had found an error in the 4th quarter ledger that irritated her professional instincts, and she intended to locate the source. The fire was going. Tea had been brought and half consumed and was now cold. Callum came in carrying his own cup and sat down across from her without announcing himself, the way he had recently begun to do, entering her spaces not as an intrusion but as a presence that had slowly decided it was permitted. He opened his own book. They sat like that for perhaps an hour. No conversation required. The fire settled. Outside, a light snow had begun, the first of the season, and the grounds went quiet under it. At one point Anna found the ledger error, a transposed figure from the Michaelmas accounts, 3 years of subsequent miscalculation, and said, without looking up, "Your steward has been underpaying the groundskeeper by 2 shillings a quarter since 1817. I would like to correct it." "Correct it." She wrote the note. He turned a page. Outside, the snow continued, and the library held them both. A woman with a pen and a ledger and the quiet satisfaction of a thing set right, and a man with a book and a cup of tea and, for the first time in 6 years, absolutely nowhere else he needed to be. It was, by every external measure, an entirely unremarkable Saturday morning. Anna thought it was the most extraordinary thing she had ever been inside of. And through the window, the first snow of winter fell softly over Ashford Manor, covering every old scar in the grounds, and making the whole of it, for just a moment, entirely quietly new. If this story moved you, comment Anna below. And if you want to see what happens when Callum finally says the 3 words he has been swallowing for months, tell me in the comments. Your response decides the sequel. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. And that is where we leave them, not with fanfare, not with the closing of a grand curtain, but with snow on a window and a fire in a hearth and 2 people who learned, the hard way, what it means to be truly seen. Because this is what no one tells you about the stories that change you. They don't end with a sweep of music. They end in a library, on a Saturday, with cold tea and corrected accounts and the smallest, truest sense that the world, your particular corner of it, has finally, after everything, arranged itself correctly. Anna spent 21 years being useful before she was wanted. If you know anyone like that, if you are anyone like that, I hope this story found you at the right moment. And to Lord Percival Stoke, wherever men like him eventually land, the documents always surface. The threads always find their way back. That is the thing about 6 years of patient, furious love. It does not give up. Simply waits. Thank you for staying with me through every turn of this. Truly, these stories are built on your presence, your comments, your subscriptions, the fact that you pressed play and didn't leave. That is not nothing. That is everything. If Anna is already in the comments, I see you. And I'll see you in the next one.